What if I told you that the person sitting at your dinner table, laughing at your jokes, going on family vacations with you, could be planning your murder? Today's case will make you question everyone you think you can trust. This is the shocking story of Leslie Prier, a loving mother who was brutally killed by the last person anyone would suspect. Stay until the end, because the way they caught this killer 23 years later will blow your mind. Welcome to Fractured Files, where we dive deep into the most twisted and shocking true crime cases that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about human nature. Today, we're exploring a case that proves the most dangerous predators often hide behind the most familiar faces. Mom, I need to know what happened to you. This is Lauren Prier, and just hours earlier, she had been informed that police made an arrest in her mother's decades-old murder case. However, what she's about to hear from investigators would change everything she knew about the people closest to her. Lauren's mother, Leslie Prier, was brutally murdered in their Chevy Chase home on May 2nd, 2001. For 23 years, the case remained cold, with no arrests and no justice. But as technology advanced and detectives reopened the case, they would uncover a shocking truth. The killer wasn't a stranger. It was someone who had been welcomed into their family, someone who had gone on vacations with them, someone who had shared countless family dinners. But, as the investigation would reveal, beneath his charming exterior lay a darkness no one could have imagined. But before I reveal exactly how investigators caught this killer, let me tell you about the woman whose life was so brutally cut short. And later you'll hear the pathetic excuse Eugene gave in court, words that will infuriate you and show just how cowardly this killer really is. On the morning of May 2nd, 2001, what should have been an ordinary Tuesday would become the day that changed the Prier family forever. Leslie Ann Jennings Prier was a devoted wife, loving mother, and respected member of the Chevy Chase community. Born in Rhode Island in 1951, she had built a beautiful life in Maryland with her husband Sandy and their daughter Lauren. At 49 years old, Leslie was known for her warmth, her volunteer work teaching English as a second language, and her dedication to her family. But on this spring morning, Leslie would never make it to work. Around 7:30 a.m., Sandy Prier kissed his wife goodbye as he left for another day at the office. Leslie was getting ready for work, following her usual morning routine. She should have left shortly after him for her bus ride into Washington, D.C. This would be the last time Sandy would see his wife alive. By 10 a.m., Leslie's boss, Brett Reedy, began to worry. Leslie was always punctual, always reliable. When she didn't show up and wasn't answering her phone, Brett started making calls. He reached out to Leslie's emergency contacts, her husband Sandy and their daughter Lauren, but neither of them knew where Leslie could be. Growing increasingly concerned, Brett and Sandy decided to check on Leslie at the family's home on Drummond Avenue. At approximately 11:35 a.m., they arrived at the residence and made a discovery that would haunt them forever. Upon entering the house, they immediately knew something was terribly wrong. Blood spatter covered the walls near the front door. Dried blood stained the floor in the corner. A corner table was knocked over, and a blood-stained rug had been moved from the foyer into the living room. But Leslie was nowhere to be seen. Following a trail that would lead them upstairs, they made a gruesome discovery. Leslie's body was found face down in the master bathroom shower stall, her legs partially extending out of the opening. There were numerous lacerations to her head. The killer had clearly tried to wash away the blood, running water over her body in an attempt to cover up the crime. At 11:47 a.m., Montgomery County Police were dispatched to the scene. Officers immediately secured the area and began what would become one of the county's most challenging investigations. The Forensic Services section launched an intensive crime scene search, processing for fingerprints, collecting blood samples, and vacuuming for trace evidence. The medical examiner's report would reveal the horrific details of Leslie's final moments. She had been strangled and her head had been battered onto the foyer floor. The V-shaped cuts on her head were consistent with the sharp corners of the molding in the foyer area. Most telling of all, there was DNA evidence under Leslie's fingernails, proving she had fought desperately against her attacker. As investigators processed the scene, it became clear that this wasn't a random break-in. The killer had attempted to clean up, with luminescence testing revealing blood evidence throughout the house in the foyer, trash cans, sinks in the kitchen and downstairs bathroom, and on door frames and the back door. But despite the extensive evidence collection, the case quickly went cold. A 2001 DNA analysis could only determine that the killer was an unknown male. The profile excluded Sandy Prier and other men Leslie knew, leaving investigators with no leads and a devastated family searching for answers. Sandy Prier found himself under intense scrutiny as the investigation began. As is common in domestic homicides, the husband is considered a prime suspect. Sandy admitted to investigators that his marriage had been strained, revealing Leslie's struggles with alcohol. Leslie was an absolute love beauty when she didn't drink. And in all honesty, it's one of the reasons why I'd kind of come home late, because it was getting hard to deal with. Sandy told investigators in an interview recording that would later be obtained by ABC's 2020. But when his DNA didn't match the evidence found at the scene, he was eliminated as a suspect. What happened next will shock you. For over 2 decades, Leslie's killer lived freely, building a successful career and appearing to be a model citizen. But in 2022, investigators made a breakthrough that would change everything. For years, the case remained dormant. Lauren grew up under the shadow of her mother's unsolved murder, while Sandy lived with the community's suspicion until his death in 2017. The Prier family had nearly given up hope. But in September 2022, everything changed when the case was assigned to the Montgomery County Cold Case Unit. Detectives Tara Augustine and Allison Dupuy were given the file, and they immediately saw potential in advanced DNA technology that hadn't existed in 2001. The detectives submitted the blood evidence to Othram, a Texas laboratory specializing in forensic genetic genealogy. Using cutting-edge technology, the lab developed a more complete DNA profile and sent it to Family Tree DNA, a consumer genealogy database. The results were promising. The database included matches with Romanian family lines, and the surname Gligor appeared in the results. Detective Augustine searched through publicly available records and stumbled upon a name that rang a bell from the original case file: Eugene Gligor. The name appeared in a tip that had been filed on January 30th, 2002, almost a year after Leslie's murder. A former neighbor of the Prier family had suggested that Gligor might be involved, noting his relationship with Lauren in 1998. But incredibly, this tip had never been fully investigated. Using the family trees they had built, detectives determined that Eugene Gligor was a first cousin, twice removed from the genetic genealogy match found in Romania. Born and raised in the same neighborhood as Lauren, Eugene had been Lauren's high school boyfriend when she was 15 years old. Their families had been close. Eugene had joined the Priers on family outings and vacations. He had eaten dinner at their table countless times. Leslie had always been fond of the young man who seemed to love her daughter. But Lauren and Eugene had broken up years before her mother's murder, and he had faded from their lives. Now, detectives faced the challenge of collecting Eugene's DNA without alerting him to the investigation. They discovered he was living in Washington, D.C., and had a history of minor arrests for weapons possession and theft, but nothing serious enough to require his DNA to be entered into law enforcement databases. Here's where the investigation gets absolutely incredible. What happened next at Dulles Airport reads like something out of a spy thriller, but it's 100% real. On June 9, 2024, undercover detectives followed Eugene through Dulles International Airport, waiting for their opportunity. They watched as he went through customs, drank from a water bottle, and casually tossed it into a nearby trash can. After he walked away, detectives collected the bottle and rushed it to the lab for testing. The results were definitive. Eugene's DNA matched the evidence found under Leslie's fingernails and throughout the Prier home. After 23 years, they finally had their killer. On June 18, 2024, U.S. Marshals arrested 44-year-old Eugene Gligor at his apartment in Washington, D.C. "Hands up! Hands up!" came the sudden commands as Eugene sat casually on the steps of his apartment building, scrolling through his phone with a cup of coffee. He was immediately taken into custody and charged with first-degree murder in the death of Leslie Prier. For Lauren Prier, the news was devastating. The man who had once been part of their family, who had shared holidays and celebrations, who had claimed to love her, had brutally murdered her mother. At Eugene's first court appearance, Lauren struggled to process the betrayal. "It's been a hell of a day," Lauren Prier told Fox 5. "He was my ex-boyfriend." Lauren and Eugene grew up in the same neighborhood, with Lauren living in Somerset and Eugene nearby in Kenwood. They began dating when Lauren was 15 and their families were acquainted. "I've spoken to him. He didn't seem weird, and how you could look someone in the eye and know that you committed this crime and act like nothing happened is pretty unreal." Lauren revealed that she had encountered Eugene at a restaurant in D.C. just the year before. He had acted completely normal, showing no signs of guilt or remorse. But perhaps the most chilling detail was that Eugene had attended Leslie's funeral in 2001. While the Prier family mourned and searched for answers, Leslie's killer sat among them, offering comfort and condolences. For more than 2 decades, he had hidden in plain sight. As investigators dug deeper into Eugene's life, a disturbing pattern emerged. After high school, he had attended the University of Maryland, eventually building a career in business development. He was known for his gregarious personality and community involvement, making charitable donations and participating in company culture groups. But there were darker aspects to his personality. His second wife had sought a protective order against him in 2021, alleging unpredictable behavior. He had been expelled from boarding school after just 2 months. Those who knew him described him as zen. But clearly there was another side he kept hidden. During interrogation, Eugene initially denied any involvement in Leslie's murder. But faced with overwhelming DNA evidence, his story began to crumble. The science doesn't lie, as Montgomery County State's Attorney John McCarthy would later say. Technology doesn't lie. As the case moved forward, one question haunted everyone involved. Why? Eugene and Lauren had been broken up for 3 years at the time of the murder. He had no apparent reason to be at the Prier house that morning. There was no evidence of robbery, no signs of sexual assault. What could have driven him to commit such a brutal act? What Eugene said in court about why he killed Leslie will absolutely infuriate you. Some theorized it might have been a burglary gone wrong. Perhaps Eugene thought the house was empty and was surprised to find Leslie at home. But investigators found no evidence to support this theory. The attack appeared personal, violent, and sustained. The case garnered significant media attention as the first time in Maryland state history that familial DNA had been used to solve a cold case murder. The breakthrough represented a new era in law enforcement, showing how advanced technology could bring justice to families who had waited decades for answers. "We identified a distant relative who lived in Romania," McCarthy explained. With that information, they had to construct a family tree. Once he was arrested based on that DNA result, we did a confirmatory test and again tested his DNA to assure ourselves that it was in fact Mr. Gligor's DNA. On May 7th, 2025, Eugene Gligor appeared in Montgomery County Circuit Court and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. The prosecution had been unable to prove premeditation, which would have been required for a first-degree murder conviction. But the evidence of his guilt was undeniable. It doesn't bring Leslie back, but now they know who did it to her, McCarthy said during a news conference. There's no such thing as closure, but I'm proud of what we do together, and I'm proud of our continuing search to find creative ways to make people in this community safer. Before his sentencing, Eugene finally spoke publicly about the crime. Tearful and apologetic, he addressed Leslie's family directly. He claimed that in the days leading up to the murder, he had been experiencing blackouts due to alcohol and cocaine use. I vaguely remember leaving the Prier house in the morning, but the rest is a blur. I know Lauren and Leslie's family want to know why I was there and what happened. I'm sorry. I'm unable to remember and provide an explanation, he told the court. He apologized that he couldn't provide the answers the family desperately wanted. Leslie always was very kind to me, he said, but he claimed he couldn't remember what had happened after entering the Drummond Avenue home on that fateful morning of May 2nd, 2001. The prosecution wasn't buying his claims of memory loss. In their sentencing memorandum, they stated, "This is a crime without a motive that the defendant is willing to admit. The defendant is unwilling to admit his motive and the full extent of his horrific conduct." During the sentencing hearing on August 28, 2025, more than 60 people packed the Montgomery County courtroom, family members, friends, and supporters of Leslie Prier. 7 of Leslie's siblings read victim impact statements, describing the devastating impact her murder had on their family. Today is a day of reckoning, state prosecutors Donna Fenton and Jody Mount said during the hearing. Prosecutors had requested a maximum sentence of 30 years in prison. On August 28, 2025, Eugene Theodore Gligor, age 45, stood before Judge David Lease to hear his fate. While prosecutors had requested the maximum 30-year sentence, Judge Lease considered Eugene's prior struggles with mental health and addiction. He sentenced Eugene to 30 years with all but 22 suspended, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. Eugene was also ordered to seek mental health evaluation and treatment and to have no contact with the Prier family. When Judge David Lease announced the sentence, cheers erupted in the courtroom. "Thank you," someone called out as Eugene was sentenced to 22 years in prison. The sentence marked the end of a 23-year journey for justice, but it couldn't undo the devastation caused by Eugene's actions. Leslie Prier never got to see her daughter graduate from college, never walked her down the aisle, never met her grandchildren. A family was forever changed by one violent act. For the cold case detectives who solved the case, there was satisfaction in finally bringing answers to a grieving family. Over the couple of years that I worked on the case, we became close with the family. It was a sense of closure and just rewarding, letting them know we got the guy and we didn't forget about Leslie, Detective Augustine explained. But questions remain. Why did Eugene Gligor murder Leslie Prier? What drove him to such violence against a woman who had always been kind to him? His claims of blackouts and memory loss have been met with skepticism, and the true motive may never be known. The case represents both triumph and tragedy in showing how advanced forensic technology can bring long-awaited justice, but also the decades of pain that could have been prevented if the original tip about Eugene had been properly investigated in 2002. For Lauren Prier, watching her former boyfriend disappear behind prison walls marked the end of a 23-year nightmare. The betrayal cut deeper than anyone could imagine. This wasn't a stranger who had destroyed her family. This was someone she had loved, someone who had shared family dinners, someone who had comforted her at her own mother's funeral while hiding the darkest of secrets. The shocking truth that Eugene Gligor, the trusted high school boyfriend, was Leslie's killer sent shockwaves through the community. How could someone so close to the family, someone who had been welcomed with open arms, commit such a brutal act? The answer remains a mystery. Now serving his time in a Maryland correctional facility, Eugene has already filed a motion asking the court to reconsider his punishment. But for the Prieur family, no legal maneuvering can undo the decades of pain he caused. Lauren can finally begin to heal, knowing her mother's killer is behind bars, yet the scars will never fully fade. This case will forever change how cold case investigations are conducted in Maryland. As the first murder solved using familial DNA technology in the state's history, it opens the door for countless other families still waiting for answers. The Leslie Prieur case proves that no matter how much time passes, justice can still prevail. And sometimes the most shocking truth is that the monster was sitting at your dinner table all along. For the Prieur family, while nothing can bring Leslie back, they can finally rest knowing her killer is behind bars where he belongs. The fractured pieces of this 23-year mystery finally came together thanks to incredible detective work and cutting-edge DNA technology. If you found this story as shocking as I did, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into the most mind-blowing cases here on Fractured Files. What do you think about Eugene's claim that he can't remember what happened? Do you believe him? Or is this just another lie from a cold-blooded killer? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to see more cases solved by incredible DNA breakthroughs, check out our playlist. Until next time, stay safe out there. And remember, sometimes the most shattered cases reveal the darkest truths. The person you least suspect might be the most dangerous of all.